Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. Today we're checking out this Sultai Delve combo deck featuring Teval, Arbiter of Virtue as our commander, voted on by my supporters on Patreon. This 5-mana 6/6 dragon has flying and lifelink and says spells we cast have Delve, so we can now exile cards from our graveyard to help pay for our spell's generic mana costs, which is incredibly powerful. But there is a big drawback. Whenever we cast a spell, we lose life equal to its mana value, and that's even if we're not delving anything, we're still paying a lot of life from now on. Of course, we do have a big 6/6 life linker to make up for it, but I've also built the deck in such a way that a lot of the curve toppers we're trying to cheat and play through Delve also have some life gain built in, so we can still cast additional spells afterwards. So then the game plan is pretty simple, trying to ramp out Teval while filling the graveyard, and then eventually have lots of curve toppers that we can cheat in play, ideally with generic mana costs, so lots of artifacts and colorless creatures, since those we can still potentially cast just by exiling cards from our graveyard and not needing any additional untapped lands. So then taking a look at our deck breakdown, we start out with the mana accelerants, lots of mana creatures and other ways to hopefully play Teval around turn 3, turn 4. Then we've got our self-mill effects that will often mill 3 or 4 when we cast them or when they enter the battlefield, so we can fill the graveyard while still getting lands or maybe creatures back out of the graveyard. And then we've got our finishers, a lot of them are colorless as we mentioned, and then we also have lots of X spells, which are also great if we have a very full graveyard, so we can sink as much mana into them as we have available. And then the miscellaneous section is also quite extensive. We've got some other cantrips that can fill the graveyard. The Spree and Overload cards are also quite synergistic with Teval, because even if we sink a lot of mana into them, their overall mana cost is still quite low, so we don't end up paying too much life. And then we also have some other equipment that will synergize well with our commander. So that's our deck in a nutshell. Now for the deep dive, starting with our mana acceleration, we've got some pretty broken cards here with Chrome Mox and Dark Ritual, leading to some explosive starts, maybe play our Teval on turn 2 thanks to a Dark Ritual. And then we've got plenty of mana creatures, Birds of Paradise, Halfling, making Teval uncounterable is also relevant. Then there's Elvish Mystic and Helena Elves, and then Molt Tender is also pretty good in a deck that's actively filling the graveyard, so it can either keep milling for Delve or can exile a card to make a mana. Same with Deathrite Shaman, exiling a land to make a mana, can also use it to deal with the opponent's graveyard. Then a Bloom Tender is a relatively recent addition, still good enough here, because with our commander in play it can tap for 3 mana, and can routinely at least make 2 mana. Then there's Fanatic of Ronas, which can make 4 green mana if we control Teval. Then there's Lotus Cobra, which is great with all the fetch lanes, which we want to be running anyways to fill the graveyard some more, so then the Cobra gets to make additional mana for us. Growth Spiral can put additional lands in play, draw card. Arcane Signet, still a great mana fixer and a ramp card. And then Harrow is also quite synergistic, since we're not only putting Harrow in the graveyard after casting it, but also an additional land while searching up 2 more. And then the World Wagon's also pretty neat with Teval, as we can crew it the turn we cast our commander to immediately attack and get an additional land. And then Uro is one of the best cards in the deck, as we can randomly mill it and then still escape it out of the graveyard even without Teval, and at the very least it's gaining us life and putting additional lands in play. And then I'm also trying the Keru Goldkeeper, a 4-mana 3/3 flying dragon, saying whenever 1 or more cards leave our graveyard in our turn, we get to create a treasure token. So it's not once per turn, so we can still potentially make multiple treasures if we're delving multiple spells, so that can also end up being quite nice. And we can also renew the Goldkeeper out of the graveyard if it does end up getting milled. And then we get to our self-mill effects. Of course, Surveilling is a great way to fill the graveyard. This can also be flashed back. The Stitcher's Plier will mill 3 when it enters or dies. Archaeologist can mill 3 while maybe finding some non-creature cards to put in hand. Quack Feast can destroy opposing creatures while milling 2 cards in the process. Ripples is one of the better ones, as it can mill 3 each turn, and we can also maybe pay life and mana to get some of the milled cards back into our hand. Aftermath Analyst will mill 3, and then we can also later sacrifice it to return all lands from our graveyard to the battlefield, which can be worthwhile. Cash Grab will mill 4, returning a permanent among them to our hand. Dredger's Insight mills 4 when it enters, and can also return an artifact, creature, or land from among them to our hand, and then it sticks around, gaining life whenever a creature or artifact leaves our graveyard. Then there's a Grapple with the Past, milling 3, and then we can return any creature or land that was maybe already in the graveyard back to our hand. A Rumble will mill 4, making a spawn token, and then revealing a permanent among those to put in hand. Satyr Wayfinder mills 4, revealing a land to put in hand, whereas Grizzly Salvage looks at 5 cards, and we can find both creatures or lands to put in hand. Then there's a Mesmeric Orb, which can mill equal to the number of tapped permanents each turn, so that can also quickly add up. Forbidden Alchemy looks at the top 4 cards to put 1 in hand, the rest in graveyard, so still helps fill the graveyard initially, and can also be flashed back, and even if we're flashing it back for 7 mana, maybe delving some cards in the process, it still only costs us 3 life, since the mana value is 3. And then there's Rakshasa's Bargain. This one will cost 6 life if we have Teval in play, so that can be a bit of a nombo, but on the flip side we can also potentially cast it by delving 6 cards away, since we can cast it for 6 generic as well, and if we cast it earlier it's also perfect for setting up our graveyard, as we get to look at the top 4, 2 in hand, 2 in graveyard. Awaken the Honored Dead is great removal starting on Chapter 1, and then on Chapter 2 we get to mill 3, so still fills the graveyard for us. The Palantir often ends up milling a bunch of cards, and we've got a lot of expensive spells in the deck that can also damage the opponent if they let us mill them, otherwise can provide a nice bit of card advantage. And then the Black Overlord, even if we impend it with Teval out, will still cost us 5 life, but we also get to mill 4, and then we get to return any creature or planeswalker that was maybe already in the graveyard back to our hand. And then we get to some of our finishers. I've also put Smuggler's Surprise here. Even if we cast it with all modes, it still only costs us 1 life with Teval in play, so that's quite nice. And that's another way of cheating our other creatures from our hand onto the battlefield, and can also be used to mill additional cards, so it has a ton of synergy throughout. And then we get to some of our big life-linking creatures. Wormcoil Engine. By delving 6 cards we can cast alongside Teval at the cost of 6 life, and then a 6/6 Death Touch lifelink that splits into a 3/3 Death Touch and a 3/3 lifelink if it dies. We've got the Flesh Gorger, 7/5 Menace lifelink that we can also maybe cast alongside Teval. There's a Breach the Multiverse, which can be cast for double black if we exile 5 cards from our graveyard, then milling 10 cards, revealing a creature or planeswalker from each graveyard to put in play, so that can also keep enabling future delve cards. We've got Platinum Angel, saying we cannot lose the game and your opponents cannot win the game. So once we have Platinum Angel in play, we can now pay as much life as we want to Teval's ability, since it's not actually a life payment, but rather we lose life equal to the mana value of spells we cast. Because an important note, let's say you're at a negative life total and you control Platinum Angel, so the game still goes on, then normally you would not actually be able to pay life that you don't have, because if you have 0 or less life, you don't have any life to pay in the first place, but the Platinum Angel still lets us cast big spells with Teval out, so that does get around it. Then we've got the Sire of 7 Deaths, a 7/7 with lots of abilities, including a lifelink. Then Ugin can also gain life with the +2 ability, and can of course also be quite effective alongside our other colorless spells. Then Villas doesn't have any life gain, but whenever we lose life, now we draw that many cards, so that can also go off alongside Teval. Portal to Phyrexia, making the opponent sacrifice 3 creatures and reanimating a creature each turn, can get our life linkers back, and since we're filling the graveyard so much, we'll often have some powerful creatures to bring back. And then we have some X spells, which also synergize well with Teval. Of course, they will cost us a lot of life. If we cast Exsanguinate for 20, it's going to cost us 22 life, so we do need to have that life to begin with. But once we do, each opponent loses X life, and then we gain X life. Can be a nice finisher. Then a Finale of Devastation, we want to cast for at least X equals 10, so we get to not only search our library or graveyard for a creature and put it in play, but also give the team +X and haste until end of turn. Then there's Doppelgang, which can often break the game if we cast it for X equals 5 or more. And then Hydroid Krasis can draw a lot of cards and at least gain half of the life back that we spent on it in the first place. And then we've got our miscellaneous section, where we've got a bunch of cantrips. Brainstorm, quite good with all the fetch lands to shuffle away unwanted cards. Consider also still surveils one, so we'll fill the graveyard a little bit. We've got 3 Steps Ahead as one of the few counter spells in this deck, and with a spree mechanic still quite synergistic with Teval, can also maybe copy some of our creatures. Chromatic Sphere and Chromatic Star, we can essentially cycle for 1 mana, and with Teval out, they will essentially just replace themselves, assuming we have that 1 mana spare. And then a Cyclonic Rift is great with Overload, bouncing the opponent's stuff back, and even if we cast it with Overload, still only costs us 2 life. And then the Skimmer is also quite synergistic, often drawing cards when cards leave our graveyard. We've Got to boot to protect Teval, giving hexproof and haste so we can maybe attack right away after maybe delving 2 cards from our graveyard and then just paying the 1 equip cost. And then there's the Mithril Coat, which can make Teval indestructible, potentially at insta-speed, by just delving 3 cards away. And then a Pact Weapon's also quite synergistic with Teval, similar to Platinum Angel, prevents us from losing the game, only applies to having 0 or less life, so we could still get poisoned or milled out, but for Teval it's still good enough, and once Pact Weapon is equipped, we can potentially sink a bunch of mana into our X spells, even if we technically don't have the life for them, since we're just gonna cast a lethal Exsanguinate or Finale to win the game on the spot. And then the One Ring is also pretty decent, just drawing lots of cards for us. And then our mana base has a couple utility lands here, Otawara to bounce, Boseiju for maybe artifacts and enchantments, Shifting Woodland can maybe copy into one of those big life-linking creatures once they're in the graveyard. And then we've got plenty of fetch lands, as you can see here, to fetch up our various shock lands, and surveil lands, of course, are also very synergistic when trying to fill the graveyard. And then a couple basics that we can also find. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Tyvar, so green elves most likely. Our hand has a Dark Ritual, can filter black with Chromatic Sphere. In the meantime, I'll have filled the graveyard with a Rumble. Yeah, you know what, I'll try it. Opponent does get to start with Llanowar Elves. Gotta play a tapped Cascade if we wanna Rumble on 2. And a Fanatic can also make a lot of mana. Doppelgang could be our finisher of choice. And then I want the lands. Right, so next turn I can cast Teval, could also cast the Chromatic Sphere here. Don't think I am necessarily afraid of removal, which would be a reason to go for it. So there's Tyvar, the Pummeler. And our opponent maybe keeping up a protection spell with a Fanatic. Alright, either way, we're looking at Dark Ritual into Teval, and then I can still do stuff afterwards. Yeah, not quite enough for a Platinum Angel, but I might want to keep the graveyard full for Doppelgang next turn. So hopefully our 6/6 survives. And then next turn we can go off. Can still play the Chromatic Sphere next turn, not in a hurry. Tyvar attacks. I suspect our opponent's gonna have some pump spells in there. Plus they could also just activate. So we take 3. And Acute Swarm's next, so our opponent wants to break the token limit. And then of course going wide is also effective with Tyvar's ability. I'll take my turn and Finale. Can I cast a lethal Finale here? Might be a little bit short. Although, let's see, I can start by impending the Overlord. Will cost me some life, because it is a 5-drop, that's the downside here with Teval. Let me start by fetching, adding another card to the graveyard. So, cast this with Impend. Costs 5 life, but fills the graveyard. And then I can always decline to get something back, even though, you know, Villas could be powerful to put in play. But I'm actually considering leaving everything in graveyard. So then we have 9 cards in graveyard. So then I can cast Finale for 10. And yeah, I'm hoping that's good enough here. Don't need to overcomplicate things. Fall to 2, but now I get to search for any creature in my deck and immediately smash with it. And then what makes sense here, I guess a Sire with built-in trample looks good. And then our spawn also gets to benefit from the +10/+10. So that's 16 in the air, and I'm assuming enough on the ground to trample over for lethal. So that was turn 2, we cast Malevolent Rumble. Turn 3, Dark Ritual out Teval. Turn 4, Finale for lethal. Yeah, that's impressive. Of course, Dark Ritual goes a long way. Opponent might still have a way to make their team indestructible and soak up some damage. Although I don't think it's going to be quite enough. Maybe if they have multiple pump spells. Defend the Rider. Makes it indestructible, that's fine, but we'll still trample over. And then 60 more from Teval. GG's. Alright, sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Elspeth, Stormslayer, so a tokens deck. And Elspeth also naturally can destroy Teval. So we need to have a good hand. Does this qualify? Yeah, I think it does. Turn 1 Elves, turn 2 Spiral. And then we'll see if we want to brainstorm, try and find a fetch land. And then Doppelgang's going to be the big payoff. And I guess we could run into some funny interactions with Elspeth as well. Getting to copy our tokens. Opponent might have a Solitude in hand if they're holding priority here. And yeah, if they deal with Elves, we're going to be a lot slower to start out. I guess I can still use Chromatic Star to fix for blue for Growth Spiral. Alright. They could have taken their draw step first, but sure. Pitching Archangel Elspeth. And now a Giver of Runes. We're not running much removal, so I don't really mind. Do I brainstorm here is the question. I could brainstorm lock myself, but finding a fetch line would be useful. And we did. Next turn I could go Growth Spiral into Mesmeric Orb. So then I probably don't need Chromatic and I can just Surveil right now, or I guess fetch and get a Surveil land. So then I think I would rather get rid of the tap land. And then I'll just pass for now. And then I want to get another blue-green land, most likely. Ocelot could be annoying. Although it also maybe helps our Mesmeric Orb plan. So I'll get a Hatch Maze Surveil. And then probably should just put lands in Graveyard as much as possible for Teval. And then now I can Growth Spiral, still play Mesmeric Orb. And then next turn maybe cast Teval, and then turn after set up a large Doppelgang. So we will be milling for 4. Caretaker's Talent is next. We'll draw end of turn off Pride making a token. I guess we could do some fun things with Doppelgang and Caretaker's Talent, allowing us to copy a token that usually wouldn't be a token. Alright, Hydroid could also be powerful. So I'm gonna have to play Boseiju if we want to play Teval. And then, yeah. Got a pretty full graveyard to cast a big Doppelgang next turn. Hoping they can't remove Teval on the spot. That's where having colorless cards in hand would maybe allow me to immediately cast them the same turn we deploy our commander. So they're still a turn away from Elspeth, unless they have Chromox to cast it right now. We're definitely in trouble if they can remove my commander, because it's going to be a while before it can be recast. They can still use Giver to sneak Ocelot past Teval, so maybe that's what they'll do. Alright, just leveling up the talent to draw. Keeping the Giver available for protection against removal, I guess. Alright, never mind, they are going for the protection and an attack. Alright, so what are we gonna copy with Doppelgang? I guess Talent and Ocelot Pride are both fine targets. As we mill 5 more cards. Should maybe start by attacking, just so we have as much life to work with as possible. Although I guess we're not quite at the point where we're casting it for 20. Alright, so Doppelgang for 13 plus 5 is 18. So then x equals 5, does that check out? 15, 17. Yeah, x equals 5 should work. I guess if I play the sewers, I get to mill 1 more. Does that make a difference? 5 plus 14 is 19. But yeah, 6 is 20 total, so we're 1 short. Could also play a large Hydroid first, but yeah, let's just try and break the game. X equals 5. 1 Mindstone they could sack in response. I would actually like their planes to activate Caretaker's Talents. So something along these lines, maybe? Could also get another Surveil lands to surveil a bunch. Sure, we'll try this. Lose some life. Down to 4. And that's a bunch of triggers. I should be careful now with my Mesmeric Orb, that I don't just end up decking. Yeah, this might actually work out poorly, so let's just keep cards on top. Because with 5 Ocelot Prides, things can get out of hand. Alright, and then go ahead and attack. I can play Chromox, which doesn't cost me any life. Yeah, maybe pitch Hydroid, so I have blue for Cyclonic Rifts. And then I can level up the talents. And I kind of just want to break the game and copy Ocelot a bunch. But yeah, I could also talent copy the talent, which is kind of a fun interaction. may want to leave Rift available. I guess never mind, I cannot bounce my own Mesmeric Orb with it. So there's a lot to keep track of. Could also copy the planes. Yeah, I guess if I copy the planes, then I will have enough mana with the Chromox to cast Cyclonic Rifts, since we will copy those a bunch. Alright, so copy Ocelot a bunch more. Yeah, this is a lot of strange interactions that I have to navigate through. But I think that's good enough for now. So we get a bunch of Ocelot triggers. I'm guessing we're gonna reach the token limit. And I'm gonna just keep cards on top since I might actually lose to my own Mesmeric Orb now. Although I guess my tokens at least are untapped for the most part. Alright, well, this is just chaos at this point. So I have 19 white mana, 1 blue and green. Now our opponent's just gonna cast a sweeper next turn, but we've had our fun. So I'm gonna mill myself for around 25 next turn. And yeah, we're not done making tokens. Yeah, I think I just milled myself by copying all the Caretaker's talents with the Ocelots. So I think this is game over. But I think it was worth it. Wouldn't you agree? I can cast Cyclonic Rift, bouncing the opponent's stuff back, but it doesn't bounce my own. I guess never mind, I could still survive if I cast a Smuggler Surprise, putting in the Angel, because then I don't lose the game. Although then I guess they can just play Elspeth and destroy my Angel. So that might complicate matters a little bit. Yeah, maybe if I had copied like an untapped land that makes blue and green like a breeding pool, I would have had all my instants available still. Although also only have 10 life with Teval in play, so that limits how much we can do. I guess there's a small chance I'm saved by the token limits, preventing me from drawing too many cards. And it's possible the server's already crashed. But yeah, feels like a worthwhile experiment. Anything else I can do at instant speed that would maybe save me? Oh, and looks like, yeah, the servers are breaking down. So did not end in a draw, didn't end in a loss, but the servers just had enough. Well, I'll take it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing a loot, so a ramp deck. Our hand's got lots of small mana creatures, maybe missing a powerful self-mill card to power up our doppelgang. But I think I still try it. So we can kick things off with maybe a Ladder Elves, which can in turn play Halfling and Molt Tender. Now I can maybe wait on the fetch land. And yeah, could be convinced to play Halfling. Because then next turn I could cast an uncounterable Teval of Dark Ritual. Opponent's got the Chromox. So they have 3 mana. And glad they didn't cast a Fury, since I could have destroyed all my mana elves. Alright, so yeah, I guess we'll go for it. And then I'll need to fetch. Could just get basic swamp. May want an extra green source. So we have Teval. Next turn, cast a couple 1-drops, and then try and set up a big doppelgang. That's the plan. Tracker. Make a clue. Don't recommend getting the mythic rare version unless you like the art. Now a smuggler surprise. Probably also wants to wait. So we'll hit for 6. Gain 6. Take 1 damage. Take 1 damage. Surveil. And put that in the graveyard to fuel Delve. So then next turn, we're hopefully setting up something powerful. 3 cards in graveyard. Couple mana creatures available. Our opponent can cast Loot, but not yet Exhaust. So it's going to be a Defense of the Heart. So our opponent gets to cheat whatever they want into play, unless I just take some trades here. Does this look okay, or do I keep Moltender alive so that can keep milling? Although it doesn't make mana naturally. I think this is fine. So now the defense is not going to be enabled. Although never mind, our opponents decided to deal all the damage to 1 creature. So now defense is still online. Okay. So, hoping I survive their defense, I can then set up Doppelgang to copy whatever they cheat out. So that might be the move. Or I could keep up Smuggler Surprise to try our luck milling some cards and putting creatures in play. I think I'm just gonna play Boots and equip it here. And then set up our Doppelgang for next turn, pretty much. Could also keep the elves untapped, in case I do want to cast a surprise. Can cast it for 7 total, so that would be with multiple spree modes. Or I guess never mind, that's 8 mana total. So then I would be 1 short. Yeah, I may as well attack then. Opponent falls to 11, and then hopefully this doesn't kill me and Doppelgang can take over. Just copying the Overlord would be pretty decent. Alright, opponent got Itali and Hullbreaker Horror. So those are both pretty good as it turns out. Our opponent can bounce the Boots and then bounce Teval. Although I guess never mind, they have to target something now, so they cannot quite target Teval yet, but they can cast something afterwards. I may actually use the Smuggler Surprise to give Teval Hexproof. Creatures you control with power 4 or greater gain Hexproof and Indestructible. So that's now the plan. Opponent casts Loot, targets Teval. I think I have to respond here. Delving away a card. But yeah, it's not looking great. We lost a lot of our mana sources. And our opponent still has a Hullbreaker Horror on the battlefield. So what's the best I can do next turn? I guess I can try Doppelgang for 2. And hope for the best. So we have 5 cards in graveyard. I guess now I can Doppelgang for 3. So, yeah, I guess that's the play. So I can copy Hullbreaker, Italy, and probably the Overlord Overloot since it's legendary. At least Italy will trigger a bunch. So that'll cost me some life. But yeah, now we get to return the favor with these Hullbreaker horrors. We get Platinum Angel. We get Cyclonic Rift. Cyclonic Rift bounces, I guess, Skimmer back to my hand. And wow, our opponent explodes. So we still had a bunch of Italy triggers on the stack. But yeah, I can basically bounce all of the opponent's creatures back while still controlling triple Hullbreaker Horror. And then get a bunch of extra mana, get an attack in for 6. So then the opponent's going to be desperately behind. So even if they do manage to recast a Hullbreaker, then they won't be able to necessarily do much afterwards. Since, yeah, it's actually debatable whether or not we should bounce Chromox, since it's a 0 mana way to trigger Hullbreaker. So maybe we would actually keep it in play here. But yeah, regardless, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Dina, Soulsteeper, often a life gain combo deck. Chromox could play turn 1 birds. We're sort of missing a payoff to ramp into, and the tap lands are a little awkward, so I think I mulligan. This one seems a bit better. A Bloom Tender can potentially make 2 mana thanks to the Archaeologist. And then Exsanguinate is a very nice finisher if we've got the life to spare. So, step 1 Bloom Tender, hope that survives. So then next turn I could go Archaeologist into Wayfinder. And there's Veto already. So whenever they gain life, I lose that much life. So they're very similar effects. So not quite an infinite combo, but it is a lot of damage potentially. So play Archaeologist, then I can play Wayfinder, and then I can still Surveil. Alright, Dark Ritual's a nice pickup. So let's see, if I cast a Dark Ritual, I can cast Teval. Yeah, maybe that's worth it. And not enough cards in graveyard to already play the One Ring, but we're getting close. Settle the Wilds is acceptable. Alright, so now the goal is just to fill our graveyard as much as possible to set up a big Exsanguinate. And let me maybe start by attacking. And gain 6 up to 30 life. And Bloom Tender makes 3 mana. So that could cast a One Ring. And then I can still play Wayfinder, play Mold Tender without needing to necessarily exile too many cards from my graveyard. So let's say we cast Wayfinder by exiling 1 card. And lose 2 life. Mill 4. And then sure, I'll take a fetch land, which is an extra card in graveyard as well. And then color doesn't matter too much. play Bloom Tender, and we can activate the One Ring. Maybe should do it now already, in case we find more colorless spells we can cast. Alright. So, protected by the ring this turn, and then next turn we can cast a relatively large Exsanguinate, although opponent's got an Exquisite Blood. Says, whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. And that goes infinite with Veto and Dina. So I guess there was a reason not to activate my One Ring yet, although as soon as we cast a spell with Teval in play, our opponent would have gone infinite. So let's see if we can maybe find instant speed interaction in response. And does not look like it. Alright, so we're just dead. Well, that's usually the Dina experience. Either they assemble the combo and you die to it, or they don't really do much of anything. So yeah, if we didn't activate the One Ring in our turn, then we basically get to untap, but then I'm unable to cast any spells, because as soon as I lose life to my commander, it triggers the Exquisite Blood, which in turn triggers Veto and Dina. So then I would have had to somehow just win with Teval, but then, yeah, as soon as our opponent can trigger Dina or Veto, they would still win. So I don't think there was any way out, sadly. But yeah, we had a nice setup here. Ripples could have milled maybe some more, and then Exsanguinate could have dealt a lot of damage. GG's. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Admiral Brass, so pirates. And our hand's way too clunky. This I could try. So we're looking at a turn 2 Cobra. And then turn 3, start filling the graveyard, basically. Don't have to play Cobra now, but especially if we draw fetch land, the upside is huge. And I'm not sure how much interaction the pirate deck can include when they need a high density of creatures. Uro with a draw, can still cast it. And maybe find another land on top, I'll keep that. And then I can still cast one of my 2-drops. So then what makes sense? Mesmeric Orb versus... I can just cash grab. Mesmeric Orb next turn would mill for 4, but then I'm not guaranteed a land to cast Teval. So I think we cash grab. And then get a fetch land. Okay. No attacks. So we're in decent shape here. Also have the 4 types for Delirium on Woodlands if we end up milling something powerful. And a Deadly Dispute will make a treasure, so next turn they can cast Admiral Brass, at the very least getting back a Scoundrel. And then Scallywag also makes a treasure. Alright, so our opponent could have a counterspell up here, which could be pretty effective. Brainstorm also good with a fetch land. So we've got a couple options. But step 1 might be Teval. And then I can still cast a free Mesmeric Orb. And then maybe I should be fetching now. Or I can wait and then next turn Brainstorm. Although all the cards in my hand are pretty good. And we'll probably find more fetch lands anyway. So if I get Swamp, I can make a green with Cobra and cast Grapple without exiling anything. Or we could go for a Forbidden Alchemy as well. Sure, I guess we'll alchemy. Delving one card. And then one in hand. Can make it maybe the Overlord, which in turn can get back Uro. Sure. And no attacks. And then with Orb, we'll mill 5 more next turn. So we'll have a pretty stacked graveyard to make use of Grapple and Overlord to get stuff back. And there's Admiral Brass. So mill 4. Ooh, that's too bad. They found a Larcenist, so that can exile Teval. And that's not what we wanted to see. So, can sack it to cast a Brainstorm. The ability, of course, doesn't work anymore. Could also just escape Uro next turn, to be fair. Found a land. So I could recast Teval right now, which is maybe still worth it. Play Teval, and then I can still cast one spell. Maybe if I grapple I can get the Flesh Gorger and cast it. Don't hate that idea. And then keep the creatures in the graveyard, since we might be able to get them back. We're down to 9, but we do control 2 large lifelinkers, so hopefully that's enough to survive. And then next turn we can have more fun with Uro. Maybe cast Overlord, get something back. Although we are also helping the opponent with the Mesmeric Orb to find additional creatures. And Breaches could also prevent stuff from blocking. And yeah, Admiral Brass still has their creature be declared as an attacker. So then Breaches could trigger, prevents one of my lifelinkers from blocking. But our opponent goes for Beckett Brass. So now they can just steal my stuff. Assuming they deal damage with 3 or more pirates, which we want to avoid at all costs. I'm okay trading the Cobra at this point. So we're at 17. Beckett Brass did not trigger. And our opponent plays a Connections, so that turn worked out. Got 17 life to work with. So can we find some finisher that can destroy Admiral? Could go digging with Brainstorm to maybe find a finisher. Currently, if we go for the Overlord, yeah, there's not any exciting creature really. So maybe step 1 is to Brainstorm. Found Cyclonic Rift, that's a good one. So let's say we get rid of... yeah, Dark Ritual's not really all that needed anymore. Same with the Supplier. And then we can Cyclonic Rift with Overload. Paying a blue, and then exiling some cards. then I can still cast Overlord. And our opponent has seen enough, can attack for 13, gain 13 life. Maybe flashback of Forbidden Alchemy, which only cost me 3 life. So we're in pretty great shape. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Narset, so Jeskai. Our hand seems keepable. With the turn 1 birds, grapple to fill the yard. And the bargain we can also cast. As our opponent plays a channeler, can expect lots of cheap spells. So for now, do we bargain? I guess so. Should maybe main phase it. And then in hand, I would like, I think, the Sire and the Ripples. So then next turn I can grapple plus Ripples and start setting up the graveyard. While having a finisher, we can either cheat in play with a surprise or just cast by exiling some spells from my graveyard. So turn 2, play Talent. Not sure how many counter spells our opponent's going to be running. They're not necessarily synergistic with Narset, but of course you still want some of the more powerful ones. Birds gets to survive. This can fetch Swamp. Cast Ripples. Now I could also go for Aftermath Analyst. Although Grapple would guarantee a land for Teval next turn. Whereas Analysts, we're maybe looking to sacrifice to get those lands back. I think I still grapple just because I might be able to cast Sire right after I play Teval. Since we're already at 4 cards in graveyard, Ripples will add a few more. Opponent now going for Breaches. Another payoff for casting 2 spells. No blocks. And grapple. And then a fetch land looks fine. Doesn't have to be a fancy one necessarily. Probably just getting an island. And then I'm happy to mill 3, and that's it. Cast Teval. And immediately cast Sire. Alright, so we're at 11, but we've got 2 big life linkers in play, so hopefully that's good enough. And then next turn we can do more damage as our opponent plays Narset. Does feel like they've been maybe holding on to a 0 mana card, could be a Mox Amber or some other artifact. Alright, just a brainstorm. So for all intents and purposes our opponent's tapped out, so unless they find a free spell we're okay. And then what does Breaches do again? Flip a coin, copy spells, and yeah, there's the Mishra's Bauble that they were hanging on to. So they get to maximize Narset's ability. Channeler flies and is forced to attack, maybe a mistake, because Sire does have reach, and Teval, of course, could also block. I guess we still only gain 7, since, yeah, we deal first strike damage, but that's still the most we could gain. And that'll do it, awesome! So we get to see this Sultai Delve combo deck in action, and yeah, Teval did not disappoint, as long as you built your deck around it by including some mana acceleration and ways to fill the graveyard. As soon as Teval hits the battlefield, you can potentially start comboing off and casting huge spells by just paying a life and exiling cards from graveyard, so that's really what you're aiming for. And then I like having some big life-linking creatures, so that if things go wrong, you can at least still get some life back to try again. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.